AskScience AMA Series, been watching The Last of Us on HBO? We're experts on fungal infections. Awah. Ever since The Last of Us premiered on HBO earlier this year, we've been bombarded with questions about Cordyceps fungi from our family members, friends, strangers, and even on job interviews. So we figured it would be helpful to do this AMA, organized by the American Society for Microbiology, to dive into the biology of these microbes and explain how they wreak their special breed of havoc. Each of us studies a different host/parasite system, so we are excited to share our unique, but still overlapping, perspectives. We'll take your questions, provide information on the current state of research in this field, and yes, we'll even discuss how realistic the scenario presented on the show is. We'll be live starting at 2 p.m. ET, 19 UT. Ask us anything. With us today are, plus, Dr. Charissa de Bekker, U/optimal_narwhal_6654, Assistant Professor of Microbiology, Department of Biology, Utrecht University plus, Dr. Carolyn Elya, U/Dr_Zombieflied, Postdoctoral Researcher, Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology, Harvard University plus, Dr. Matt Kasson, U/ImperfectFunguy, Director of the International Culture Collection of Vesicular, Arbuscular Mycorrhizal Fungi and Associate Professor of Forest Pathology and Mycology, West Virginia University plus, Dr. Ilan Schwartz, U/GermHunterMD, Infectious Diseases Physician and Instructor in the Department of Medicine, Duke University username, /U/nationalgeographic.
In some of the early episodes, fictional experts play up our helplessness against fungal infections, making claims like no vaccines, no medicines, no preventatives, no cures. It's not even possible to make them, but there are a whole bunch of in real course. I understand how there might not be a working treatment for a specific novel fungus. But the prologue seems to make a broader claim than that. Is there something about fungi in general that makes them more resistant or otherwise difficult to treat than bacteria or viruses? Or are claims like these just there to make the story more dramatic, but are entirely inaccurate to real life?
I've heard that there is a lot of potential in studying fungus for medicinal purposes. What are the coolest attributes that fungus have that would benefit medical science?
What common fungal infections are actually the most dangerous in humans? As an additional question, the human brain is much more complex than an insect brain, that it seems impossible for humans to suffer from a fungal infection that puts a human in an aggressive zombie-like state. But what kind of behavioral response would we expect to see if humans were infected by such an infection?
What should you actually do when you discover fungi on the body? Asking for a friend.
I've heard in passing that one of the long-term effects of a COVID-19 infection is increased vulnerability to fungal infection in the lungs. Is this correct, and can you elaborate?
Thank you for your time. Q. The fungus in The Last of Us seems to have properties of Cordyceps fungi and slime mold, in that each infected human appears to be an individual fungal colony, but they sometimes are linked through a network that can cover miles. Is this something that is actually seen in nature?
As scientists studying such infections, if you were caught up in the events of the movie, what would you do / how would you study Ellie if she presented herself to you as immune?
Thanks for doing this. Can you explain a little bit more about the guy who injected himself with magic mushrooms and got a really bad blood infection from it? How exactly did the fungal cells draw nutrients from his blood? Were those actively metabolizing cells free floating in the bloodstream, or were they anchored and pushing hyphae into surrounding tissue?
Thank you for doing this AMA. I am curious what your take on a sudden outbreak day is, and if UV sterilizers would work against this kind of thinking. Is a Cordyceps strain that can infect humans would first show up in immunocompromised people, instead of anyone and everyone, and likely take longer for symptoms to it being a particularly virulent strain? Would most healthy immune systems likely be able to fight it off? Also, it seems to me that a Cordyceps strain would spread more via spores, instead of bites or tendrils. Would sterilizing areas with commercial UV lamps for a few hours be enough to spores? This is something my workplace started doing after hours during the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe it would be a useful countermeasure during a fungal pandemic? Thank you again for taking the time to answer these questions.
In the show, The dead/infected humans get these supernatural abilities, pole vaulting over counters, very speedy sprints, but does this actually happen in the insect world? I was under the impression that, for example, ants go into a bit of a crippling frenzy, and simply climb up to give the spores the biggest reach. Obviously there's some creative flexibility here, but I just wondered whether a Cordyceps fungi can enhance any of the ant's motor functions at all?
So the premise of the show is that due to global warming the Cordyceps fungus adapts to warmer temperatures and are able to thrive within humans. How realistic is such a scenario? Does fungus adapt? Are there documented cases of fungus adapting? Side question, any tips for getting rid of my toenail fungus?
It's theorized that climate change will increase the average temperature, and as fungus adapt to this temperature they will be more likely to infect humans, because they can survive humans' resting temperature. If fungi could evolve this way, why have they not evolved like this in the tropics, which already have higher average temperatures?
What's the weirdest species behavior you've seen as a result of an infection?
These questions are for Dr. Ilan Schwartz. First, thanks for taking the time to answer these questions. And #X200B, how do you foresee the rise of antibiotic resistance affecting your practice? Do you see phage therapies as viable? I've done some research on them in grad school, and while it sounds cool and can sometimes work, to me it seems like we're still decades away, at best, from creating novel phage therapies for things like MD and TB. Have you been following the H5N1 outbreak news? Given the recent development of highly pathogenic H5N1 evolving the ability to efficiently transmit between wild mammalian populations, how long would you estimate we have until the barrier between non-primate mammals and primate mammals is broken? As the climate warms, we've seen yeasts like Candida auris start to infect humans primarily in hospital settings. Can you reasonably foresee any other fungal, outside of ascomycetes and zygomycetes, that can gain the capability to infect humans? As someone who is applying to medical school primarily to become an infectious disease physician, what are the upsides and downsides to the ID fellowship? Beyond the obvious, which is far less compensation that you deserve. Would you choose it again if you could go back in time? Thanks.
Great question. The answer is yes. There is something that makes them harder to treat. The main problem is that fungi are much more similar to animals than they are to bacteria, or plants, and consequently there are a lot more conserved cell structures, genetics, shared cell machinery and genes from a common ancestor. The practical implication of this is that there are far fewer drug targets in a fungal cell, like enzymes where drugs can interfere, without killing our own cells. As a result, we only have 3 classes of antifungals, and they 1. Azoles are the only one with options but also causes liver injury, interact with other medications, and are unsafe in pregnancy. And resistance is developing in some fungi because these are used widely as fungicides in agriculture too. Amphotericin B, aka amphoterable. 4 only, which means only used in hospitals. Works great but is quite toxic on kidneys, though we definitely use it when we have echinocandins, only 4 formulations, for now. Works great and is well tolerated but only kills a few types of fungi and doesn't get into all the places we need it to for some infections, like the brain.
Fungi are diverse in their production of small molecule compounds, many of which are medically relevant. Cyclosporin, penicillin, and psilocybin are just a few of the useful compounds that fungi produce. There are an estimated 2 to 4 million fungal species, with less than 6% formally described. Even if 1% of the remaining fungi produce novel compounds, imagine all the potential contained within all that diversity.
Fungi are great chemists. So I'd say that there's tremendous potential in exploring fungal natural products for a whole bunch of applications, including disease therapeutics. Thanks for the question. Here is an answer to your first question. The WHO recently published a priority fungal pathogen list where they rank fungi according to their importance in causing infections in humans. It considers things like the total number of infections globally and also the severity of infections, whether there are treatment options, etc. They rank the highest priority group to include the following: /Candida albicans, a very common yeast that all of us carry in our mouths and in our gut, but which causes a huge number of infections of mucosa. Think vaginitis and thrush, diaper rash, etc., but also invasive diseases like bloodstream infections in people with compromised immune systems, like receiving chemotherapy, and in hospitals/ICUs with venous catheters. Candida is the new kid on the block, important for two reasons. 1. It spreads really efficiently between people and can contaminate hospital environments, curtains, bed rails, windowsills, etc., and then infect vulnerable patients. And 2. It can be resistant to one or more classes of antifungals. There are only 3 classes, and sometimes can be resistant to all 3. C. aureus was only described in 2009 and has spread around the world since. It is the only fungus at the top of the CDC's threat list of drug-resistant infections. Here is some info from the CDC. Aspergillus fumigatus, a ubiquitous mold that all of us inhale spores of every single day, without it causing any problems, but in patients with immune systems that are weakened by diseases like blood cancers or by medicine used to prevent rejection of transplanted organs. It can cause very serious pneumonia /Cryptococcus neoformans, and other yeast. This is found in the environment, and can cause brain infections in people with immune systems weakened by advanced or medications used to prevent rejection after transplantation. Cryptococcal meningitis is a leading cause of death related to advanced in many parts of the world. The full report from WHO can be found here. With regards to your second question, when people have brain infections caused by fungi, they don't turn into zombies, they just get really sick. Fevers, weight loss, seizures or like symptoms. We all have fungi on, and in, our bodies. Millions of them. They are part of bacteria too. In fact, some people have calculated that there are more bacterial plus fungal cells in our bodies than human cells. I don't know if this is right or not, but the point is that fungi are normal. Have dandruff? That's caused by a fungus. Baby got diaper rash? Fungus. These are examples of where they cause minor problems, but many live with us in harmony.